Okay, so today we're here with James Hogue. And James, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? When I reached out to you, one of the reasons why I wanted to interview was because you have a wealth of real-world experience, especially in the law enforcement arena. It seems like there isn't a job that you haven't done in law enforcement. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started and what you've done?
Well, first, getting started in the martial arts. I lived next door in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, to my very first instructor, David Santiago, who is Filipino, but also trained in some Indonesian and Filipino Kuntao Indonesian silat, such as Chimande. And he was teaching neighborhood kids, and there was no martial arts school in the whole area. But he'd teach all the neighborhood kids, and my dad saw me interested in it, and he was a Korean War vet. And he used to love to watch the Rock Army guys go at it. So went next door and said, hey, can you teach my son along with the other kids? He said, yeah. And I began my training at 5 years old. And I've run about a couple of years. Our first Japanese school opened up a studio. Pretty much all the neighborhood kids went there. My parents couldn't afford it. So I stayed with Master Santiago, and what I thought was, oh my God, it was devastating. I can't be with my friends now. It actually turned out to be a very valuable skill, but I was able to stay there and study this great art with a great master. And then as the years rolled on and me training with different instructors, such as Master Santiago, Tony Marcial, Alpo Angelo, Guy Savelli, and a whole bunch of other people that I've trained with in rec centers, such as judo and jiu-jitsu, and did karate, and just whole different facets of fighting, and studying of pankration and Dumog. It's just, it all came up. And my dad, he did a lot of bodyguard work, security work, and I naturally followed into the line of work that he fell into. Figured what better thing to do with my skill, because I've spent a lot of time fighting and growing up in the inner city of Cleveland. Had to do a lot of fighting there, because at 9 we moved from Uniontown, Pennsylvania to Cleveland, which was a real eye-opener, because in Uniontown it was a fair fight. People gathered around, 2 people fought, loser lost. And there was no kicking, because kicking was for girls. You go to Cleveland, not always that way. First fight I got into, it was me and a kid. Moment I hit him, everybody, all his friends watching around, caved in on me. So that taught me I had to really evaluate what I knew. But as a kid, it's not really, it doesn't really help you out. But I still like to study different arts and find out different ways to fight. And every time I've lost a fight, it was, how could I make this better? How could that not happen to me anymore? So as I got older, I became more in school of, there was bullies, I kind of pick on the bully, or I set myself up to, for the bully to pick on me.
You were testing yourself.
Not quite. I was always testing myself. I wasn't always afraid to fight, but a lot of times I didn't fight because, frankly, I'd rather get hurt than someone else get hurt, even the guy I was fighting. So, but I wasn't going to stand there and let people just be bullied on and kids be hurt. So there was one incident. I was in 7th grade, and we moved to Tennessee, and I was in Dibble Elementary School, and just outside of McMinnville, Tennessee. And there was this big old boy. He was known as the toughest kid in school because he looked like he flunked 7th grade about 8 times. And he kept on picking on kids, and finally I just, I saw an opportunity, so he went to get out of steps, I kind of squeezed in between them, kind of pushed him back, which set me up for him to pick on me. Then he did, and he basically was saying, I'm gonna kick your butt, I'm gonna kick your butt. So I said, well, let's do it. We go off behind the bushes, a few of the friends. As soon as he turns around, he hits me. And the first thing I'm thinking of, and at the time I was probably about 120 pounds, skinny rail, and he hits me, and I'm looking at him like, a guy your size, and that's the best you can do. So he went to swing again. I ducked. I wound up sapuing him, which is a front foot sweep in Indonesian martial arts. He goes down. I bring my foot up, and I look at him, and he's like in a back, like crab walk position. My foot comes up, and I look at him, and I'm like, you're not even worth it. And I walked away. The rest of the day, he was mad and upset, saying, oh, I'm going to kick your butt. Finally, after a couple of days, he started saying, oh, yeah, we fought, but, it was tie. I left it at that. So he left me alone. And anytime he started picking on someone, I'm like, okay, man, leave him alone. Okay, man, not a problem. I didn't know he's a friend of yours.
Interesting. So even back then, you were in the business of protecting other people.
Oh, definitely. And then, like I said, when I came up when I was 18 and I had to get a real job, a full-time job, it was just a natural fit. My dad doing security. My whole life I was protecting people. It was just this natural fit to start doing security.
So what was your first assignment doing security? What kind of things were you doing at a young age?
Well, my first assignment, I went to work for Cleveland Metro Security there in Cleveland. And I was working for Don Mastro's because that's where my dad worked. My first assignment was actually protecting empty construction sites. And one time I actually had to watch topsoil. Then finally he got this one bar. It was like a strip bar. And it was, what was it? I think it was Pinky's. And every person he put in there was getting into a fight, and the guy was getting hurt, and he'd quit. So he threw me in there, thinking, hey, Jim, I know you can handle yourself. You go in there. So I went in there, and the only thing I had on was a baton, one of these thick plastic batons. And I got into a few fights, and I was successfully thrown out guys almost twice my size. And everything that I did was, contain, capture, throw out. And sometimes I had, to use my baton, use the Filipino martial arts that Tony Marcial taught me. I kind of sometimes wrap them up with the baton. Then there's times I've just got them outside and we just had a slugfest. I'm not going to say that, even though I say I won, but if you look at me, sometimes you'd say not. And that right there really taught me that even if someone's unskilled, doesn't mean they can't be a good fighter. And it's the amount of pain you're willing to take. And through my years of watching people fight, I noticed that the first punch that he lands, the guy's instinct is to protect that and back away, and then the other guy presses in. Which I had to know that in order to be a successful fighter, I had to be able to let that punch hit me, absorb that pain, and strike back in him. And I remember the teaching of David Santiago was, it's okay to say ow. Just let your hands and feet say the ow for you. But don't succumb to the pain. And that right there rung true, very true with me.
Interesting. So you definitely had a lot of real scraps under your belt at that point. And is this right about the time you started getting into law enforcement?
Well, I started when I went to a security school, because in Ohio you had to do a 120-hour security school and get a state certificate. So then I started doing more bar rooms, such as strip bars, biker bars, just regular dance clubs. And then after I got my certification, was able to carry a firearm, then I went into stuff like fugitive retrieval, or would you say bounty hunting. Then finally I did, around about 21, I became a correctional officer, and around about 24 I became a police officer.
Now you've been several roles as a police officer. You started out as a local police officer, but you've done some other things, federal and military, correct?
Oh yeah, I was a military policeman. Did a tour in Iraq 2003 as part of the invasion into Iraq. We were held up about a week because we were supposed to invade through Turkey, and Turkey didn't want to play with us. So we were held up for about a week, but we went in. We were some of the first boots on ground, and had to police Iraq. I've even helped train the Iraqi police officers, and it was a really great experience.
Interesting. Now, when you came back from the military, what were you doing then?
Well, in the military, I was just basically a line MP. But since my experience, since I had like 7 years law enforcement experience and a lot of education, they had me doing a lot of teaching the police officers like radars and LIDARs, DUI detection, standard field sobriety testing, and then also they wanted me to head up the unarmed self-defense portion, where I started teaching them the SILAT, the Filipino martial arts, the knife fighting, stuff like that.
Interesting.
And then with the Iraqi, while in the Iraqi school, I was the chief hand-to-hand combat instructor in the Iraqi Police Academy.
Now, once you finished your time in the military and came back to the States, where did you pick up career-wise?
Went back to my first love, which was law enforcement. I got a job as a police officer in a small town of Inman.
And then at some point you became a federal police officer as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I got a job with the Veterans Department of Veteran Affairs Police. I did a little time with them. Then eventually I left and changed careers. But then I went to the Lynn County Sheriff's Office.
So at the current day, you have been a security guard, a bouncer, a bounty hunter, a jailer, a sheriff, a municipal police officer, a military police officer, and a federal police officer. That's a lot.
Correct.
And I'm assuming you've seen tons of action, made a lot of use of force encounters, had a lot of use of force encounters. What can you tell us? With the benefit of that experience, what did you come away with that you can share with people that maybe don't have that kind of experience?
Well, how I teach a lot of my students is that we have our standard drills, and like different locks, different type of stick drills that we cooperate with each other and we stay with the drill. But as they advance, we stop cooperating with each other. We start trying to counter each other, where now you went to do a technique, and let's say you try to trap his hand out of the way to punch. This guy now blocks your strike. Now you have to retrap and try to come in. Then he'll try to block that. And then eventually, after about 3 or 4 attempts, they'll then abort. We have things where we sit down and we do hand trap sparring, where you're sitting on the ground, you got headgear, fifth gear, and you're going to try to trap and get around their guard in order to hit them. Now, this is done moderately. It's not done full blast, but it's a way of not cooperating. And when we do our wrist locks and different throws, the guys try to counter, try to put in the counters to the throws, try to grab. So it's constant not cooperating, just like the regular person. I've seen a few videos where people are like, well, see, here's how you take down a guy. Now you can lock him up. And then after the guy gets taken down, he stops fighting. He just goes with the program. It's like, no, that doesn't happen in real life. Once the guy's on the ground, he continues to fight. You have to overcome that. So that means you might want to get in this one arm bar, but now you have to have a few more. I'd say at least 2 or 3 more. And then maybe switch to that arm bar or go into a different lock in order to get this guy cuffed. Most of the programs is, hey, he's fighting. Oh, I'm passing this. I'm blocking this, taking him down. Now I'm blocking, and the guy stops fighting and allows you to handcuff him. That's not real. That's not realistic, because the guy's going to give up that easy. You could have done a lot less means because apparently he's not truly wanting to fight you.
Gotcha. Now, Jim, let me ask you this, Jim. You teach a combination, the variety of Southeast Asian martial arts. Now, I've been around police and law enforcement training circles for a while, and there's a lot of trainers that have never trained in martial arts. They learn the programs offered by a variety of companies. They do a couple-day train the trainer course, and that's what they're out there teaching. As a lifelong martial artist that teaches a variety of different martial arts, what are your thoughts on that? And, what are your thoughts as far as what you need to effectively train police officers?
Well, there's big money in having a program and in teaching law enforcement. Law enforcement is always looking for better ways to take someone into custody, looking for ways to try to lower the resistance of the person doing it, and also for the protection of the officer. It's beneficial for everybody. However, most people are coming with a shiny ball saying, hey, look how great this shiny ball is. And they're like, ooh, very nice. We want it. Even though that some of the programs I've seen went from in kind of crazy ideas to just suicidal for the officer to do. And I'd say it'd be best the trainer to have worked in law enforcement, worked in security, in corrections, stuff like that, to understand the mentality of the criminal, the mentality of the person fighting. Because, like I said, I've been in fights with trained martial artists, and I've been in a fight with people that knew nothing. One of the biggest surprises I've had was when I went and did a combination of strikes on this one biker, which in my mind and how I was taught, this guy should have went down. And the guy just backed up, looked at me, and still came at me. And that was one of the bigger eye-openers, like, wow, this isn't supposed to happen. So it's that mentality you have to grasp. And any trainer has to understand that not everybody gives up. Not everyone, after this one technique, the fight's over. It's going to be a constant fight. I've had people that I've handcuffed and still trying to fight, still trying to kick me. We had a taekwondoist who was, he was a champion. He was like fifth degree, did all these type of national tournaments. Even though we got him in handcuffs, he's throwing like hook kicks and everything else. He broke away from my partner and started doing his wheel kicks and started doing the side kicks, and eventually he succumbed to the taser.
Gotcha.
So it's like, yeah, he was handcuffed, and yeah, you're not supposed to handcuff a taser, handcuff the suspect. But at this point, game has changed. And it's that mentality that trainers have to have in order to train police officers, that not everything's black and white. There's a whole lot of gray in this area. And it's not, hey, handcuffs go on, guy stops fighting. And that is the biggest thing I've seen of, hey, take down, handcuff, oh, fight's over. Not necessarily.
Now, Jim, one of the things that I've heard time and time again from officers and even trainers working for departments is the complaint that a lot of the programs that are imposed on them, they work for the department, they're told what they have to teach to officers. They feel that most of these programs are designed to keep the department safe from liability, not necessarily to keep the officer safe. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's 100% true. It's not about keeping the officer safe. They want to be able to say, hey, look, we paid for this program. We trained you in this and this, so you should be able to do it. But I can go in there with a program that will teach people how to fight with a feather and show all the good programs, and all I have to do is show how it will lower their liability, and they'll probably buy the program.
So it's really up to
we
the
both
officers.
know we both know fighting with a feather is not realistic.
Sure. So it's going to be up to the officer to seek out quality training outside the department in some cases.
True, but that's not always the thing. Most officers see themselves as, and especially men, as macho. I can handle myself in a fight until they get into a real fight. And most self-defense programs in police department is like maybe 1 or 2 hours. In the academy, I remember having a 4-hour class on self-defense. And now they're like, okay, now you learned how to defend yourself. It's like, no, everyone just learned how to get hurt.
Gotcha.
So yeah, the officer is going to, if the officer is serious about being able to defend himself, he has to seek out quality instructors.
Now, James, let me ask you something here. The greater community outside of the law enforcement community, the last 2 decades or so, we've seen a big bump in what some people call, real-world self-defense or reality self-defense. And in a lot of instances, the trainers or the programs, it could be marketing, but they tend to take a real negative critique of traditional martial arts. And they kind of put out there that they have this new modern method that's the end-all, be-all, and it's what's needed. You've been in a lot of scraps. You've worked in so many different capacities in the law enforcement security field. But traditional martial arts has always been your base. What would you say to those critics as far as the value of traditional martial arts compared to, these new programs that are popping up left and right?
Well, let's put it this way. Just because a good program, like, I would say one of the best marketing people out there is the Krav Maga people. And anything that looks like Krav Maga, it's Krav Maga, like the Bourne series, Jason Bourne series. But it's actually Filipino martial arts. So, but, Krav Maga is like, this is Krav Maga, this is Krav Maga. And they market it better. It's not about who's the better instructor. I've seen great instructors with bad marketing skills that very few people knew about, but they were better than the people that were making millions of dollars off of it and had a great marketing strategy. So it's not about, the new stuff coming out, it's not about if they're good. It's a matter of how can we market ourselves to people? How can we make those people believe we're the end-all and be-all in order to spend the money? And that's pretty much where it's gotten to be nowadays. It's, just, hey, I'm trying to get your dollars. I want to be the king. So I'm going to put a great kick-ass marketing strategy out. Now, let's address the traditional. I'm not really all that traditional because when back in the 90s when a lot of my guys were training in my school, it was we did a lot of like boxing type. And then if one went to the ground and they were at a distance, they did harimau, which is tiger fighting, Indonesian tiger fighting, for when you're on the ground fighting an upright for an opponent or an opponent on the ground at a distance. And then if, they try to work themselves back up to, but the fight never stopped. Then if they happen to get on top of each other, then they went to grappling mode. And then if one of them would fap the other guy out. So it was always kind of a mixed martial art, and I was called the barroom brawler for that. And a lot of traditional martial arts are why it's barroom brawling. And that was mostly because of all my barroom bouncing days.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was it was from, because I was a very well-known bouncer, so that's what a lot of people called me. I was nothing but a brawler. But yeah, if you came in my class, you saw students doing stance groups. They were doing low stances. We were walking in stances. We were learning proper punching techniques and rotating of the hip and the feet. We were doing a lot of traditional stuff because without the base and how to generate that power, how to rotate your body, how to develop that strength, you're not going to be as effective in that non-traditional arena. So the traditional martial art base gives you the understanding of how to connect to, how to root yourself to the ground, how to connect your hips to the rotation, to build the strength, and how to keep your balance in different situations in order to go outside that and become more of the street type fighter. And a lot of people are forgetting that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. There is a lot to be learned in the traditional martial arts. I think that some of the more modern approaches tend to overlook or to minimize, and I think they're really missing out on that.
Yeah, and it's really taken a lot away from the martial arts, and especially to deny that. And even forms, a lot of the mixed martial art guys and stuff are like, oh, I hate forms, but they don't realize the form teaches you how to move, how to balance, helps you develop the rotations and how to kick out of different postures. And that right there, even though that's not done exactly the same way on the street, but you can still see that element there. There was a video going around on Facebook that showed traditional Japanese karate doing certain things with a form, and then showed MMA guys doing those exact same things. which was great video because it showed how the traditional can blend into the non-traditional.
Now, James, speaking, just kind of springboarding off of the mixed martial arts, and something you mentioned a little bit ago, your Harimau, and you're talking about the ground fighting. Now, I've seen your Harimau, and I love it. I think it's a great program. In this day and age, there's a totally new perspective on fighting from the ground. But you might even argue that perspective has gone, they've swung that pendulum a little too far into the ground grappling for street survival. Your Harimau is ground fighting, but I've seen it, and it's definitely not grappling. Can you tell us about the Harimau and what the goal is of it, and maybe how it's different than traditional Harimau?
Well, I can't really say the goals of every Harimau, but I can tell you the goals of mine. I've seen Harimau where artists go and say, oh yeah, as soon as the guy goes to hit me, I go right to the ground, I take him to the ground, and I start using Harimau. Well, that's not what I use it for. It's, if I happen to be in a fight, I get knocked to the ground, I can use that Harimau in order to keep a nonstop fight going without saying, oh man, I got to get up. And one of the best things I saw, and it was funny as hell, is that they were teaching officers to get up. Is post your hand here, hold one hand in front of you to protect yourself from punches. Now stand up. Well, the thing about it is, both your hands, one of your hands are out of play. The other one's trying to protect punches from, 4 weapons, 2 hands, 2 feet. And that took part of his techniques out of there. Where Harimau, I can get into those Harimau stances, kick, fight, punch, and then during all the body work and the lankas, I can get up in the midst of that big fight. I could be spinning around into a spin kick and then boom, come straight up out it, stand into a front kick. And for me, it's, if I'm knocked to the ground, I fight my way back to my feet. And I teach police officers that in a form that's called fighting to your feet. So that's the goal of how I do it. It's not, hey, guy throws a punch, we're going to take him down and we're going to do all this Harimau. It's nothing like that. And if you're going to go to the ground every time you're in a situation, you're going to find the same thing that a lot of MMA guys and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys have tried to take guys to the ground in a bar room or a street, because all of a sudden his friends would just stomp a mud puddle into you. And that would be the same thing with the Harimau guys. But for me, it's not about staying on the ground, fighting on the ground, finishing on the ground. It's about, oh shit, I got knocked to the ground. Now I have to keep fighting. But now I'm back to my feet. Now I'm still fighting. There is no break in fighting. There's none of my weapons are taken out of play.
Makes a lot of sense. James, another thing I wanted to ask you about is one of the arts that you teach and that you've trained in. It's a lot lesser known than I guess it's cousin arts of Silat or Kung Tao. But what can you tell us about Pukulan?
Oh, you're talking about more of Pukulan Shamande, which is an art that was brought here by Willie J.C. Wetzel, or William J.C. Wetzel. The art is in a lot of controversy after the death of Master Wetzel. That obviously it was a fight between him and his son where the son wound up killing his father. And that shattered the whole system, and basically people drew sides, and it was just big infighting. And now, since my Facebook type site, which I've since closed, a lot of people came together and they made friends, and we're patching those old wounds. But here's the thing that I like about the Pukulan Chimindi, was that anything that comes in to strike, I'm going to put an elbow there, a knee there. I'm going to punch it or strike it. Whatever comes in, it has to be hit with a thorn. So it's like if you throw a punch, I will take what most traditionally is called a flat fist and bury it into your muscle, into that bicep muscle group. If you come with a big haymaker, I'm going to bring my arm up and I'm going to impale that muscle group onto my elbow. If you kick at me, I'm throwing my knee there, and it's going to impale your leg. So whatever is going to come at me has to be struck with the thorn, that we call the thorns. Because the symbol of Pukulan Chimindi is the rose. And why it's the rose is it looks like a beautiful system. But if you attack or if you try to snatch the rose from its bush, you will only fill its thorns, which is why we call it the thorns. And once those are impaled, then we go in a barrage of strikes and try and overwhelm our opponent. And then, of course, then they have like different animals such as the monkey, the snake, crane, tiger. And then all those combined make your fifth animal, which is the dragon.
Now, this art is not taught prolifically here in the States, correct? There's only a handful of instructors still teaching this art?
Yeah, most of the instructors you're going to find they don't have a regular school. You have one of the bigger organizations that are more recluse, and they're not as friendly to people like me. But most of your really good instructors are teaching out of their basements, garages. It's not really widely taught in schools and seminars like most of them, like your Pukulan, Buddha Nagara, or Sarak, or Mandi Muda, stuff like that.
Gotcha. And where do you see this art surviving another couple generations, considering that it was, kind of splintered out and lost its leadership?
I really hope so. This is an art that I do love. I'm not part of the traditional group because I'm more of the non-traditionalist that teaches the non-traditional. But I hope it will survive, and hopefully it will grow. But what will mainly kill it is the thought of, this is Willie Wetzel's art, this is how he taught it, and if you change it, then it's not perfect. Well, as you know, that if an art doesn't change, it'll die, or it becomes not as effective. Because I can tell you the way I fought just 10 years ago is not how I fight now. My fighting has evolved. And as you can tell, probably your system from just 10 years ago has evolved and has changed with the times. And every system has to do that. But the thought process in a lot of the Pukulan people are, if you change any of it, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be the ultimate system, and no system is the ultimate system. So because of that reasoning and how everybody wants to stay to themselves, I could see the system dying out, which I hope really doesn't.
Now, you trained in this system, and this is something that you and my late instructor, Eddie Ivester, and our mutual friend, you both shared that in common. You had that common lineage to that system. One of the other systems I know that you both had some shared experience in was the Kuntown of Guy Savelli. And Savelli is a very polarizing, kind of controversial figure in those communities. Can you tell us something about your time training with him?
Oh, sure. Guy Savelli is probably, as you said, one of my more colorful instructors, which I've had two. But him being probably the most because of the ministeric goats and killing things with his mind. And I was probably one of the pains in his butts, because every time he would talk about how I can, I could have you standing with a gun, finger on the trigger, I can, blot you out, blot my memory or anything, and freeze you at a distance, come 20 feet, get behind you and knock you out before you can pull the trigger. My answer was always, Master Savelli, my gun's in the car.
Okay.
It was like, yeah, I'm willing to take that bet. The whole time I trained with him, if you talk to some of his students, man, all these amazing stories of metaphysical stuff that he's did. I don't have not even one, because I'm not blinded by him. But I'm going to tell you, from a student that's pissed him off enough, his whip, and especially across your chest, will flatten you. But as a fighter, Savelli was one of the fastest guys I've ever seen. He is probably one of the most aggressive fighters I've ever seen, and probably one of the best understanding of combat. And this guy, and his whole art was based on survival and overcoming your opponent, and it was just overwhelming. And there's very few people out there teaching that as well. But with, people like my friend Chris Dernenbaum, he's now taken hold. And I remember when he first called me, And I kind of told him, I said, hey, man, get out there. He was kind of looking for an instructor. I'm like, man, you got to get out there. You got to put videos out. And I'm like, I'm not about that. I'm not that serious. I just like to play around. But I told him, I said, if you want to do that. And then, of course, Guy Savelli gave him the same thing. So it's getting more known and becoming more attention worldwide, which I'm glad. But, yeah, Savelli was probably one of the most frightening people you could train with, because back in his day, he was an intense figure. He was a fighter.
And where did all of the esoteric things that Savelli's known for come into? Where did that come into play? I mean, it sounds like he was a legitimate fighter, he had legitimate skill and material. Where did all this other stuff come from?
A lot of it came from him, and also come from like readers, and because if you go deep into Silat, you'll have what's called as a loom, or the magic, and you got Tenaga Dalam, which is another form of magic, and it was ways of attacking your opponent and making weapons appear and disappear out of your hand. And that's where a lot of that came from. And then he went off trying to develop that once he left Readers, and trying to develop that. And he was actually studied by Duke University. The Army studied him. He actually struck a couple of goats that actually died. And they call it the Denmark, but what it really was a force of a strike. You struck the goat, and it created a path wound through the heart, but there was no entrance wound, no exit wound, no projectile found. And he basically showed me the training for that, which was less than magical. It doesn't worry about time and day, weather, what's their astrological sign. But he tried to develop that because he was taught a little bit of the magic by master readers, and he tried to develop that on his own.
Gotcha. Now, I've heard mixed things about his affiliation with Readers. I've heard some things saying that he was most definitely affiliated with Readers and was a high-level student. Other people say he, popped in for the free trial class and then, went off and running and made up his own thing. I mean, what do you know about his association with Readers? Because, as you said, the Readers Kung Tao is kind of coming out more to the spotlight these days, which is great because he's kind of legendary, and it was a shame to not see that continue. But what do you know about him and Readers?
What I know about him and Readers, there's a lot of things going around saying that he only studied for 6 months. But if you ask Savelli, he'll tell you very honestly. He goes, yeah. He goes, in New York, in Jamestown, he did study for 6 months. But then again, when Readers went to Albuquerque, that's when Savelli also moved to Albuquerque. Even William Readers Jr. even told me that the certificate that was giving him the orange sash by William Readers, with William Readers' signature, which is all on Savelli's website, was signed by his dad and was given to him with the understanding that he was not supposed to teach. Which is odd because that's one of the highest ranks in the system, is an orange sash. It's basically their black belt.
Okay. Any idea why he was instructed not to teach?
That, I don't know. If you'd asked Savelli, it was basically because he wanted to be the only one teaching. But if you go through Readers, the flavor of Readers, early on he taught more like a judo, karate, and then all of a sudden it went to Kung Tao, then it went to Lusong Kung Fu, and and then later in his life, towards the end of his life, he started teaching Tai Chi. So in different facets of his life, he started teaching different things. And I was told different stories of why he stopped teaching the Kung Tao. But then again, the Slice lineage says, well, no, we know that too. What you're doing, that's only part of what we know, which they call fire hands. So it's like, okay, I'm not going to argue because I don't know you guys' system. I did play around a little with them. I can tell you they're very good guys. They're just a great bunch of guys. I've played around with them in Cleveland, very dedicated. And, good fighters, but the thing about it is, my problem was they always attacked what I knew, and I was like, hey, I like this. So if it was just a small portion that Savelli got, I liked that portion. So I learned it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, different phases, different in his life. It went from karate to judo to kung tao to kung fu to silat to tai chi.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned that Savelli was one of your two most colorful instructors. Can you tell us about the other?
The other one was Al Colangelo. One that me and Eddie Vester had in common. When he studied with Willie Wetzel, he was my Pukalan teacher. But he did pretty much a lot what I did. Was he was concerned when I met him in the combat aspect. So a lot of the flowing and a lot of the traditional stuff was kind of stripped out, and he was more concerned with the animals and the fighting and the whole Raja, what I call a Raja Hadi, which I should say he named it a Raja Hadi. Fighting to where we impale things was taught to me by Al Colangelo. And when I started training with him, it was all about fighting. But then as the years rolled on, it was more about metaphysical and having the ultimate system and can't be touched. And I was like, I'm out. I can't buy into this. But the Al I knew, man, had a short range, could throw an elbow and knock you back. I mean, anything you throw, he would impale it. He was a very good Pukalan teacher. And after I left him, I went to a lot of Pukalan schools. I showed him my animals. And there was no doubt that, this is Pukalan. However, I didn't have the traditional 5 forms that they have. I didn't have certain little flowing forms that they had, which eventually I did learn, and eventually I don't use anymore. But I could see why Al kind of pulled them out. He was more interested in fighting, where some people are just overall art, which is not a bad thing.
Now, you've been exposed, Jim, to a lot of it sounds like you don't subscribe to it, of course, but you've been exposed to a lot of what people label as the esoteric side of the martial arts. And I know from previous conversations with you that you are pretty skilled at sleight of hand and stage magic. I know from my reading that a lot of stage magicians are skeptics, and they will often even work to debunk some of these things. With that kind of background, what did you see? Did you ever see chinks in their performance? And were you able to tell if these things were just sleight of hand, or whatever happened with your perception of these esoteric aspects of training as you saw them?
Yeah, Savelli never really did anything around me. Again, Al, he did a few things, which was he tried to do a few things, but it's just physics based, and he would say, "Well, it's cheap." Like, no, that's like he would go to have you root and try to not to be movable, and you go, "See, I can't move it." Then all of a sudden, he would just take up one fist, and he would rotate the fist out, and he would just very almost effortlessly move you backwards, and you'd be sliding across the ground. And it's like, no, it's physics. It's not chi. It's not that. It's just simple physics. And like you said, I was a stage magician in my younger days. I still do magic. I love magic. The only difference between magicians and a lot of your esoterical people now, magicians will admit, yeah, everything I'm doing, if you think I can really do this through magic, you're crazy. This is entertainment. There's a trick to it, no kidding. Where the esoterical people want to make you believe that they're doing it through some type of greater gift that they have, and they're basically preying on the weaker people, weaker-minded people. I had one person tell me, say, "Hey, Jim, man, you guys, he basically said that, that you guys in America are probably the most scientific people. You want proof and scientific. So you put one Asian guy in a Kung Fu uniform and you're going to believe any shit he says." And that's true. In America, you just take one foreigner, like Indian or Chinese or Japanese, he can make the most outrageous claims that he could do with chi, and people friggin' buy into it. I even had one of these guys tell me, "Well, Jim, it only works 40% of the time." I said, "And that's exactly why I don't train in it." I said, "Even if it was real, you give me a gun that works 90% of the time, I will tell you to keep the gun. If it doesn't work every time it goes bang, and a gun only works really anywhere from 98 to 99% of the time, because a firearm will jam. Things will go wrong. You have to correct that malfunction. But if you're telling me that this thing's going to jam every 10th time I fire the trigger, and I don't want that weapon. So if you're telling me that this metaphysical stuff only works 40% of the time, then it's not worth my time to even train, even if it was real.
That makes sense.
Because if you're going to defend yourself, you need it now.
Gotcha. And Jim, now speaking of firearms, as somebody that has a law enforcement and a military background, where do you see firearms in the landscape of training for the average citizen, average individual? Because I've spoken to people, even within our own organization, that are very leery of training with firearms. They feel that it's not their thing. They feel it's not honorable. They think that that's just something that police officers and soldiers should have. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, the thing about that is I've had people say, well, I'm not going to worry about learning martial arts or any physical self-defense because I carry a gun. Yeah, really, great. There's only certain times you can actually pull the trigger on a human being. There's only certain times you can actually shoot, and I'm going to talk as if every time we shoot, the person dies, because the likelihood of that happening is very good. So all of a sudden, this guy is mouthing off to you a little bit. You feel threatened. You're going to pull a gun and shoot the guy? Or if the guy is equal height, equal weight, and pretty much you could defend yourself, or let's say the guy's a little smaller than you, you're going to just pull a gun out and shoot the guy. Well, you're going to wind up in prison because there are certain criteria that has to be made before you shoot. Then you got the martial artist saying, I don't need guns because I do martial arts. One of the craziest things that was told to me was in working for the Indian Police Department. And like I said, small department, small town values, small town minds. And one of the things said, hey, I'm a martial artist. Jim, I saw you move. I saw you're good. He goes, I don't think you should carry a gun at all. And I looked at him and I said, the moment I start perfecting that whole matrix bullet dodging thing, I will lay down my gun. But until then, I can catch a bullet once because, it's going to kill me.
That's amazing. That was somebody in the department that actually suggested this to you?
I had one of the city councilmen suggest that because I was so skilled in martial arts, and he actually came down in my basement. We worked out because he was a martial artist, and he was very impressed with my system. And he took a few little classes, and he felt that I should not have a gun because I was so skilled with my hands. And I told him, like, that's great until the guy has a gun.
That's amazing.
One of the best lines in The Last Dragon was, one bullet from a .45 will end all this kung fu bullshit. And yeah, it will. And for a martial artist not to realize that is what in law enforcement we call tombstone courage. So for a real person that's serious about self-defense and defending themselves and others, is that you have to have a good empty hand game. You got to have a good stick game, knife game, and yes, even a good firearms game. So that would be, to me, a complete fighter, a complete self-defense person.
Great. Well, Jim, it looks like that's the time that we have today. I want to thank you very much for taking the time out to speak with us, and hopefully we can get you back on soon and cover a couple different topics because there's plenty to talk to you about for sure.
I'll be glad to talk to you anytime you want to call.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim.